Hi everybody, my name is Holly. I'm from the Skagit Watershed Council and welcome to our page. On this page we will be giving you step-by-step instructions to make a luminary globe. A luminary globe looks like this. The design will be largely up to you. It doesn't even have to look at all like this, but we do ask that it somehow connects to the Skagit River or the salmon that live there. In this example, we have the first steps of the salmon life cycle represented here. This is what it'll look like when it's lit up. Before we get started, let's set ourselves up for success by making sure we have the correct supplies. Some things you're going to need: a pair of scissors, an old food container or something with a nice tight-fitting lid. A larger container like this. You don't need this, but this will help you out. Something to keep your area clean. I'm using this flat piece of cardboard. A flat area to work on. Ideally something that's not going to be in the way for the other people who live in your house. And the rest of the supplies a lot of you have received in a kit that looks like this. Welcome to day one. The goal for today is to make the foundation for our luminary globe. This is what it's going to look like. It is made out of tracing paper, which is nice and strong. This is going to give the shape for the luminary, which we will start designing on day 2. It's extra important that today you pay attention and follow the rules as close as possible, because our kits are designed with just enough supplies for you to make the globe this way. Before we get started, let's set up our workspace with the materials that we're going to need today. I like to start with your little container with a lid. You can put the lid off to the side for now. I have added 1 tablespoon of water to my jar here. This is going to hold our glue. The glue that comes in the container is a little bit too thick for us. That's what the water's for, to make it a little bit thinner. So unscrew the lid from your glue and put in half. When I hold this up to the light, I can see that about half of it's empty. So we're going to save this for later and put it off to the side. Next, I'm going to take my brush and I'm going to mix the water and the glue until it's nice and even. This will take a minute. So we're going to set that off to the side. Next, we want to get out our tissue paper. Your tissue paper is pre-folded for you in good squares. So what we're going to do is we are going to actually tear along the folds to get a bunch of nice squares. This is nice and easy. Just tear. Okay. If you've ended up with little edges like this that are folded, that's totally fine. If you want to be extra diligent, you can rip those off and set off to the side. If you want to be really diligent and have the nicest quality material, you'd actually take these sharp edges that some of them have and rip along those too. So everything has this nice ripped edge, which will ultimately lay flatter. The only other materials you need right now are your cup, 1 of your balloons, and your tape. Looks like we have our space all set up. We're ready to start on the foundation for our luminary globes. First thing we need to do is blow up our balloon. Sometimes it helps to stretch your balloon out a little bit before you blow it. The short end of a standard piece of paper is 8.5 inches. You want your balloon to be no bigger than that. Be careful not to overinflate your balloon. If it's too big, you might run out of supplies. This balloon is a little bit too big, so I'm going to let a little bit of air out. This is more like it. It's extra important to tie the knot in your balloon super tight. This is how you do it. Notice that I'm really pulling to make sure it's tight. In fact, I'm going to have everybody double knot it just to make sure none of the air escapes from this balloon. So we're going to tie one more knot. All right. Now we're ready to attach the balloon to the cup. I recommend placing something small and heavy, like this rock, to weight your cup down. Take the bottom of the balloon and put it inside the cup. Then you're going to take out your tape, unroll it. If there are little bits on the end that aren't sticky, it's okay to just rip those off. So you should have a nice big flat piece of sticky tape, and you're going to rip that in half, putting one half over here to attach the balloon and the cup, and on the other half across from it, do the exact same thing. If you have access to hair conditioner, place a thin layer of that on top of your balloon. This will make your job easier later. We're ready to start putting the tracing paper on our luminary base. Tracing paper is the ideal material for this because light passes through it well, but it also has a lot of strength. The best way to glue your tracing paper is to put it down flat and glue one side. If glue is dripping off your brush, then you have too much on it. So I recommend a couple of times going back and forth, wringing out the extra wet glue from your paintbrush until your paintbrush is nice and wet, but if you do this, no glue drips. So this is the perfect amount of glue on your paintbrush. You want to paint the glue onto the paper. Try to get as little as you can on the material that you're protecting your table with. The cardboard in my case. It'll make cleanup better later. So we're evenly brushing a small amount of glue all the way across. Now I'm ready. There's glue all the way to the edges. It's nice and even. This whole thing is wet, but not dripping. We want to start by placing the first paper to connect the balloon and the cup together. And I found that it works best if you kind of do it in a diamond shape. So this is our first tracing paper added. Every time we lay down one piece of tracing paper, we're going to want to go over it and make sure it's nice and smooth. So again, we're going to get the extra liquid off our brush, so you have a nice moist brush, but not dripping. And then we're going to go over the edges and make sure that they have enough glue underneath them, and make sure that they're lying nice and flat. If you have any major bubbles, you can work those bubbles out by scraping along them. If your brush dries out, just dab it again, get off the extra liquid. As you move your balloon and cup around, there will be a tendency to have a weak spot here, so as you go through, you'll want to reinforce this area and make sure it's nice and glued down. You may have to do this several times as you go about making your luminary. So that's our first one. The second piece of tracing paper is going to be on the opposite side. We're going to do exactly the same thing. We're going to get some glue on our brush. We're going to get the extra liquid out so it's nice and moist but not dripping. We're going to brush so that it's nice and evenly distributed with a little bit of glue all the way to the edges. And then, in diamond shape, we're going to connect the balloon to the cup. It's really important to make sure that you have a good connection between your balloon in your cup, going down at least an inch. That's because the cup is going to be part of your finished luminary. Here's another example of a finished luminary. This part is the cup and this part is the balloon. All right. We are now ready to follow the same steps, adding your next piece of tracing paper here and here. So at this point, your base should look like this. We're going to continue this process until the entire globe is covered. Every time you add pieces, I recommend keeping it in the diamond shape and overlapping, so about 50% of the tracing paper is covering area that already has tracing paper over it, and 50% of it is not. We're getting close. I just put on the last big piece to cover up my luminary, but I still have a couple of pieces left. I'm nearly finished, but there are a couple important finishing touches at this point. First off, I want to see if there's any holes in here. By holes, I mean areas where there's no tracing paper, just balloon. When this dries, at the very end on day 3, when we do our finishing touches, we're going to actually be popping the balloon inside. So if there's an area where there is no tracing spot, it'll turn out into a hole. The best way to search for a hole is to hold it up to the light. So hold your luminary up to the light and look through it with the light on the other side. If you see a hole, it should pop up. If you're not sure, if you think it could just be glue, go ahead and just give it a little touch with your finger, and you should be able to quickly tell if that's paper or if that's balloon. After looking at my luminary pretty close here, I'm not seeing any holes, but I do see a couple of spots where I just have one layer of tracing paper. So what I'm going to do with my remaining large pieces of tracing paper is I'm going to rip them into smaller pieces, and I'm just going to patch up those weak spots. If you're getting to the end and you have just a couple of extra pieces and you don't know where to put them, you can always just put them to reinforce the edge where the balloon meets the cup. Now that your luminary is done, put the lid on your container. Save any last little bit of glue that you have for day 2. You want to thoroughly wash out your paintbrush with warm water. And make sure your luminary is sitting someplace flat where it's not going to have a bunch of wind that might knock it over. You want to make sure that it's not dripping wet. You want to make sure that it's not touching anything. All right, that's it for today. Welcome to day 2. By this point, you should have finished the foundation for your luminary globe, and it's time to start thinking about design. Remember, we are asking you to do this project as a way of celebrating the Skagit River and the creatures that depend on it. There are many reasons that the Skagit River is special, but for us at the Skagit Watershed Council, a lot of the most important reasons have to do with salmon. The Skagit River is the only river in Washington state that has wild populations of all 5 species of salmon. That's definitely something to celebrate. Scientists have listed 137 species that specifically depend on salmon to survive. That's nearly half of all vertebrate species that have been identified in this part of the world. The Skagit River produces about half of the Chinook salmon, also called king salmon, that enter the Puget Sound every year. These are the salmon that are the bulk of the diet of the southern resident orca whales. Go to the More page to find information about the Skagit River and the life cycle of the salmon that live there. I want you to pay attention to the three main habitats that the salmon have: the river, the estuary, and the ocean, and think about your design based off that. Since this project is focusing on the river, I ask that you have your design relate to either the river itself or the sea or estuary that it drains into. On day one, when we were building our globes, a lot of you probably set your cup down just like this to build. This is actually upside down. Remember, the finished luminary globes are going to end up being in this orientation. So if you want to do this, that's okay, but remember it's upside down. A lot of folks have trouble thinking upside down. I know I do. So that's where your container comes into play. You can just set it down and put your foundation in like this. Now it's in the correct orientation. You may have noticed that we included a tracing paper in your kit. These are some designs that you may want to include in your luminary. You're certainly not required to use any of these, and you are not limited to just these. Feel free to look at books or print sheets off the internet, whatever works for you, but these are some tools for folks who find them useful. Let's say I want to add this salmon to my globe and I want it to be blue. So I take a piece of blue paper. I'm going to hold that paper down steady. Be careful that you're not using a marker with water-based ink. Otherwise, as soon as you put any glue over this, it's just going to bleed all over the place and make a huge mess. Okay. So now I have a nice outline, and I'm just going to cut that out. Now this is ready to glue onto our luminary. And there we go. Sometimes when you're working with dark colors like this purple, it can be really hard to see the outline of the image below. So here's a fun trick that actually a student taught me last year. If you go to a sunny window, you can use it as a light table. This way it's a lot more easy to see the image underneath your dark paper. It'll make a difference whether you're putting light colors on top of dark colors or dark colors on top of light colors. I'll show you what I mean. Let's start with a couple of dark colors. I have a dark green and I have a dark purple. I also have two light colors. I have a light pink and a light yellow. Now we're gonna have a little fun and we're gonna add some color splotches on top. I've cut mine out to look like little hearts. So let's see what the purple looks like on top of the yellow, what the green looks like on top of the pink, what the pink looks like on top of the green, and we got our yellow on top of the purple. Now I'm going to use a little bit of glue on top. You can barely see that there's any pink in this square of green. So how do you get the pink heart to show up as well as the green heart? That's where the trick comes in. If you know you want to put a light color on top of a dark color, you need to think ahead and plan. Our pink and our green, we're going to put them together and we're going to cut out a heart the same size on both of them. So I'm folding these in half. I'm going to cut half of my heart down the middle. So I've got a shape that looks like a teardrop, but if we unfold it, it turns into a heart. And I have two of them. I also have the other pieces here. So what we're going to do is we're going to put this heart inside of this background so it'll show up. So comparing these two, big difference on the way it looks, right? There's another way we can do it. This is just a piece of yellow that's big enough to be the heart. And now we have our square, which we're going to cut out our heart from. We just need to make sure that the heart we cut out here is smaller than this piece of yellow. There we go. I've just been reminded of something really important. This is upside down. When I designed this, I should have put this right side up using a cup like this. Hopefully you don't make the same mistake I did. Towards the bottom of this page, I'm going to give two examples of luminary designs that I will walk you through. One of which is very simple and relates to the river habitat, and that is to make your globe look like a salmon egg. For those of you looking for something a little bit more complicated, I will also walk through the estuary or sea habitat, and we will build this luminary, which has an orca whale and some salmon in the eelgrass. By no means do I want you to make the same luminary globes that I made. I just want to show you my process so you can think about your own design. For further inspiration, I put together a slideshow of images I took last year when I taught this program in schools. As you watch these videos, I recommend having a piece of paper and a pencil handy and just jotting down ideas that come to your mind. You also might want to look at your packet of tissue colors, and maybe the colors will inspire you. We made it to day 3. Congratulations! Today we're going to finish up our artwork. Before we begin, give your work a nice touch and just make sure that it's totally dry. If it's even a little bit wet still, there's a chance it might collapse in on itself when we remove the balloon. So make sure it's 100% dry. If you're in a rush, you can try using a blow dryer to speed up the process. If you wanted to add any detail with a marker, it's best to do that now before we remove the balloon. With a fine tip marker, you can put in pretty much any detail you want. Next, we're going to cut the bottom off of our balloon. You can do just a straightish line like this, or you can do whatever pattern you feel like. Since this is a salmon egg, and salmon eggs are usually laid in pretty shallow water, I think I'm going to put just a few waves on top here. There we go. Since I kind of have a wave theme going here, I'm going to do some more dramatic waves up here. This part can be a little tricky. Now that I got my scissors in there, I can cut. Alright, so I now have 2 waves right here. Next thing to do is to remove the balloon inside. You want to start by popping it with your scissors. Then very carefully removing the balloon. It's glued in there, so this will take a little patience. You don't want to rip it out too rough, or else you might rip a hole into your work. So I'm just using my fingers and gently pressing down. There we go. I'm going to do the same thing with my other balloon here. Popping the balloon. That's a really cool sound. And then gently removing the glued balloon. Now you want to think about how to attach the string. If you have a hole punch, I recommend just punching a hole on one of either sides. You can also use your scissors. In a pinch, you can staple on your string. There we go. On this luminary, just as a reminder that we're not limited to the supplies that we provided for you, I put this fancy ribbon on top instead of the string. Now all that's left is to put in our light. In order to turn your light on, you first have to remove a little piece of paper that's inside of there. So we're gonna screw the lid off gently, and you see this little white piece inside, we're just gonna take that off. That just blocks the connector from the battery to the receiver. And then we're screwing the light back on. And then your light should come on. So now you just need to turn your light on, put it in your luminary, and see what it looks like in the dark. Nice. Let's see what the other globe looks like in the dark. I don't think it's dark enough.